Hi everyone, I'm Chris Leonard. I'm the Chief Learning Officer of the Thrive Alliance Group. At Thrive, we provide mental health training, coaching, and certification to help our participants become certified school mental wellness specialists. When everyone at your school is equipped to deal with mental health issues and intervene effectively, it helps improve your climate and culture of mental wellness. Tonight I'll be talking with Sky Tooley. You can follow them on Instagram at growingwithmxt. Sky Tooley, who uses the pronouns they, them, is a trans, non-binary, anti-bias, and social justice educator in Los Angeles, California. For the past 7 years, Sky has worked to recreate elementary curriculum with a social justice focus and while actively engaging their learners in lessons around identity, diversity, equity, action, and justice. Over the past 2 years, they've been involved in union work in their Los Angeles community, including the 2018 Los Angeles teacher strike. They've given presentations on LGBTQ+ focused topics to educators across the United States, including at NCTE 2019. They are a participating partner with the Flux Institute, and they have published articles to We Are Teachers and Teaching Tolerance on activism and pronouns. Sky is currently teaching 5th grade and working closely with their friend A. Schwartz to create inclusive content on their Patreon, Growing Outside the Binary. They live with their adorable dog Terrence in Los Angeles. So I'm just looking to see when Sky joins. As soon as they join, we'll get started. This is quite the silence. I hope people are having a good evening out there tonight. There you are.
Hello.
How are you, Sky?
I am good. Had to rush
Excellent.
home a little bit, but I made it.
Were you a little harried getting home?
A little bit, yeah. It's Los Angeles, so.
Oh, no, totally understood. I'm totally understood. I had the internet crash in my office and I had to leave and come home because I was going to do this from my office, which has a much cooler background than this.
Yeah.
But here we are. So I'm really glad that you were able to join us tonight, and there's a lot for us to talk about. So
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to jumping in.
Awesome.
All right.
Cool.
So one of the things that really stood out to me as I was looking at some of your recent posts was how deeply concerned you are, not only about trans rights, but about trans lives. I don't know if people are really aware of just how difficult and how serious the threats are. Can you talk a little bit about this?
Yeah, it's the rhetoric's been going on for a while now, and now with the actual laws passing and everything, it's becoming, a larger issue. Because I'm trans lives are daily. We're constantly assessing our safety, assessing how we want to present ourselves to the world, as there is a safety issue with just being ourselves, minus any laws that are existing. So currently, just with the laws that are being passed, they're really targeting transgender youth and trying to criminalize their existence. Sorry if you hear pitter patters, that's my dog. And
that must be Terrence.
Yes, yeah. He's very excited I'm home. that's like the biggest thing really right now affecting trans lives. And then because of that rhetoric around just being transgender and being in existing as a trans person, our safety is becoming more and more at risk. As they take away healthcare from trans youth, there's already laws and discussions of like how can healthcare be taken away from what little we have in the healthcare system, what little can be taken away from trans adults, and making it harder to access the care that we need in order to feel fully ourselves. So yeah, in general, there is just a constant attack on being transgender in society, because us existing is pushing against what society sees as normal, quote unquote normal, right? Pushing against heteronormative beliefs. It's pushing against what we believe the binary, right? It goes against all the beliefs around the binary. So like our existence in a lot of ways is resistance to, one of my friends writes it that way. And it really is us pushing against what society has deemed to be normal, and us saying like, no, there's so much more beyond that. Look at us. We are expansive and we're beautiful and we're whole. You don't fit into this box you've created. And so that's really where a lot of that pushback is coming from, is that, you know, people are like saying like, we're more visible access. And so because of that visibility, we are becoming a larger target.
Yeah, and you know, in addressing that question, you referenced a lot of what's going on legislatively. So I think that, you know, people watching tonight, cisgender allies who are watching tonight, would like to know what they can do to help. And what, you know, what would you suggest? What would be the most powerful things that people could do right now?
I mean, I think the most, gosh, like it's hard. Like there's a lot of things. So like, I think one of the biggest things that really, for myself, really shone a light on, I guess, the discrepancies between being trans and being part of the queer community, is how many people were so ready to jump on board with Don't Say Gay bill specifically, and how easily people use that as, like, you know, a way to infiltrate and be like, hey, like, let's all band together and say like we want to say gay, like band together and say we want to talk about these things. The trans bills have been going on for years, and I've never seen the amount of outpouring of support that I saw for the Don't Say Gay pill happen for gay. And the biggest thing I think all people realize, including cis allies, is that the when we focus on uplifting trans people, specifically uplifting black trans women, and uplifting indigenous two-spirit people, then we are uplifting everybody and we're making access for everybody. And then putting that focus on that is what we need to be putting all our energy into, because really what's happened is this focus on what has become acceptable, which unfortunately is white, cis, and gay. And because of that, there's this acceptance. So like, oh, that's accessible to me, so I can, you know, speak to that, versus, oh, trans is not as accessible to me. I don't quite understand it, so I don't know how to speak to it. So instead of asking like how, just actually start speaking to it and speaking up and saying like, no, we need these bills to stop. We need youth to be able to access healthcare, and we need youth to be able to access therapy. We need youth to be able to access all things, because the narrative, unfortunately, is leaning toward, well, what could we, you know, integrate into what's already acceptable, versus just actually just stepping up and speaking for trans people. Because that's the biggest thing I saw honestly, was just the fact that so many people were so quick to jump on, be like, oh yay, they Don't Say Gay bill wagon, and no one thought about, for the last like 5-6 years, all the anti-trans passed. So being aware and then speaking like, oh, that's happening, but actually like speaking up about it, talking about it. When you hear transphobic remarks, like, even if you're not totally educated on it, say something. Say like, hey, that doesn't sound like, you know, quite right. Like maybe we should like not say that and like really unpack that, where that transphobia is coming from. Because when we say that's transphobic, we're not calling you necessarily, we're just saying, hey, that's something that's ingrained in our society that we need to unpack. Because like I've had to unpack my own transphobia, and I'm trans, so like we
Yeah,
all
yeah.
and stepping up and stepping up for trans youth and trans people, and looking for where is there access, like even if you don't know if there is someone trans like in your workplace, like asking yourself like, is there a gender inclusive bathroom, and if there's not, speaking up about that. Like it shouldn't always be trans people or gender expansive folks to do that work. And what cis allies can really start doing is doing more than just putting pronouns in your bio. Yeah, so, and like I have a bunch of action items, and there's plenty of trans people out there like who have put action steps too for like the actual bills. So just being aware of those bills too, signing those petitions, sending donations to the organizations that are fighting for trans rights in those states who don't live there and can't, actually sign a letter or whatnot. Those are just like really basic things. But the biggest thing on is actually just really doing more than just going with what's accepted in society. Because a lot of the things that people are doing is like, oh well, I understand the don't say gay bill, so I can speak to it. And it's like, just because you don't understand what trans people need doesn't mean you can't speak up and say like, hey, like let's change this.
Yeah, you may not know exactly what people need, but you know bias when you hear it, right?
Yeah.
And I think you made such a great point about dealing with transphobia and your own transphobia, because that's such a, I mean, I remember the Toni Morrison book, The Bluest Eye, which was really talking about, the racial bias that existed within the Black community, where, there's this kind of self-hatred that people have when you're in this kind of oppressed minority group. And, we all have to be aware of our own biases, and we, it's very fashionable today to say, "Oh, I'm not racist. I'm not bigoted. I'm not transphobic." But everybody's got a bit of that phobia within them, and really kind of starting with oneself and being straight with yourself and honest with yourself about what's going on with you, and then just looking around at basic courtesy, right? Because these things that people say, these kind of jokes that people make, and these asides that people say, and things like that, we just take them for granted, and they kind of fly under the radar, and we let them go. But they create the underpinnings for the legislation and some of the bigger stuff. So
yeah, and just like misunderstandings too, as well.
Yeah.
And
if you don't know, it's okay to ask, right?
Yeah, and it's there's like, and my thing too is like, in an age of the internet, we have so much information and real actual factual information. Like you can go find easy access to what it means to support someone who's trans. Like there's like a whole Wikipedia of here's steps how to support your transgender friends. Like there's so much out there now that you can.
Yeah, really, that's a good tip. When in doubt, go on the internet, right? And you can find things. So you referenced, obviously you referenced gender inclusive bathrooms, which is, a basic things that schools should be doing, but schools can play a very important role in supporting gender identity and positive feelings about it. So what are some other gender inclusive practices that schools can adopt?
So like as a school or even as a district as a whole, some of the big ones are looking at your school policies. Are they inclusive? Because if you look at it from the lens of making sure that it's inclusive to all genders, then you're going to start to see where the binary is playing such a large role in your school. So like a example, and this is also just goes in general with like biases around girls and what like femme presenting people wear, but looking at your school uniforms or what's appropriate for school, like what is listed, what is considered acceptable. And most of the times we'll see like, oh well, girls can't wear spaghetti straps or something like that, like, so just like down looking at something like as simple as that and being like, wait, why do we have that policy? Like what who's more mass presenting wears a top that's with spaghetti straps, you know, so something like that really start to break from biases around gender and even clothing and where that all like plays a role. And also like looking at the wording too. So a lot of wording in our well, policies or even letters going home will specifically say dad and mom. And this isn't just a gender inclusive thing. This is also in general our communities. Most of our communities, they do not, they have one parent household, or they have multiple parents, or they have two of the same sex parents, or you might have a non-binary parent and you know a male parent. So it really just depends, you know, on the household community. So really thinking about, okay, what's a more gender inclusive wording we can use versus saying mom and dad. Or I watched a TikTok the other day of an amazing lesbian couple, and they talked about how they had to talk to their school because they had a father-daughter dance, and they were a lesbian couple with a daughter, and it doesn't, that's not inclusive. And so just thinking about things like that, just really really important when in school. And then on a more simpler thing, like I work in elementary, so I will say I speak more to the elementary side. You know, reading inclusive picture books, having visible representation in your library, and this is speaking more to like LGBTQ plus as well as trans. Like, there's so many wonderful books for older kids, and there's so many fantastic accessible picture books for as young as pre-K, and they're all age appropriate. They all deal specifically with identity, and they all introduce steps, and also just breaking the idea we have around gender, because it's in everything we do whether we realize it or not, and especially when it comes to clothing and colors and things that we play with. Just talking to kinders, a lot of time you'll be like, oh wow, like you're already like grabbing onto this vine, like
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, the color is only for boys, or the color is only for girls, or you know, girls play with the dolls, you know, boys don't, or girls wear nail polish, boys don't. Like it happens so young, and so the sooner we can start having those discussions, because they're ready for those discussions, the better. And like and it also just giving access points for teachers so they know how to have those discussions. Because one thing we all have to, like going back to what we said previously, one thing we do all have to do is unpack our own biases. And we all have, along with transphobia, we do all have some homophobia. We've been taught to be homophobic. I know as a kid, I always would call things like, oh, so gay. And that's very homophobic thing. And we've had to have that conversation in my classrooms previously, because, you know, kids will say it because they hear it. So we'll talk about that, you know, in a very kind and generous way, because we all make that mistake. So that's also a big thing as you unpack it. Know, like, other people will be on journeys, right? They're going to be at different places in that journey of understanding their own homophobia and transphobia. So to give grace in that, and have those critical discussions, because that's really important in our classrooms as well as outside within the campus.
So lots of good advice there, but you know, if I had to sum it up very shortly, it would be challenge your assumptions, right?
Yeah.
You know, challenge your assumptions. Look again at your policy. Look again at assumptions you're making about a dance. Everything. You know what you're calling things, how you're addressing color, all of these little things. And then don't assume that little kids aren't ready to talk about this, because sometimes they're more ready to talk about it than we are. They ask these questions. You know, a 4-year-old will blurt out anything. You know, what is that? You know, tell me more about this. So certainly kindergartners are ready for it.
Yes. Yeah.
So just to underscore that, the importance of gender inclusivity, what would you see as the mental health or emotional consequences when we don't think in a gender inclusive manner? You know, what happens to queer and transgender youth when we just disregard?
Well, I will say, like, a resource everyone can go look at, the Trevor Project. They're one of the few people that do a full expansion study on queer youth. So they do a survey every year, looking at the mental health, access, all of these things for queer youth. And one of the big things, so in the last one, one of the big things they found was, and this is consistent every year, is that LGBTQ plus youth are 3 times more likely to experience depression, anxiety, and suicidal ideation when they are not in an inclusive environment, when they're not feeling accepted in their spaces, whether that be at home or school or both. And trans youth, it actually is even higher. I can't remember the number right off the top of my head, but it's even higher than that. And some of the, and what always blows my, always give this fact to everyone, is that statistic drops significantly when there's one person in their life who accepts them and for who they are and supports them. And that just like I always tell people, and like when I do, conferences, it's like, sit with that for a minute. One person, not even a whole school, not every teacher, one person in their life either uses the correct pronouns for them, tells them that they're loved, tells them that they're valued, tells them that they matter. And that rate of depression drops. And so it's so important and that's like really like where my passion lies, is like, if one person in every school knows this and creates that open and safe, inclusive space for these, whether it be something as having a book out, with patient or a pride flag, like that will change that student's life to see it. And I've seen it happen. I've heard stories of it happening, of kids that walk into, their science classroom and they'll see that pride flag, like, oh, I'm safe here. It is just like that we can do. So that's what I always tell people. Like, you don't have to be all grand. You can always start small, because those little things are change the course for so many students. And because so many of our queer, unfortunately, they don't make it that far. And it's a crisis within our community. A lot of them do going through with suicide. And it's really hard to see and hear. So that's the reality we're in. And especially now with these bills coming through, it's really hard for to thrive in some of these states for these kids, because they don't know how they're going to make it to 18 without care that they're now being stripped of. So that's like, definitely that's where we're at. And so I do want to speak like fully to that, because it's, it's a hard truth, but it is the truth. And we can do things to change that course.
Yeah, really important sometimes, that one person. I'm reminded of Oprah doing her video with Mrs. Duncan, her 4th grade teacher, who was like the one person who recognized her, and how she said how life-changing that was, right? Yeah. And all kids want to feel that sense of belonging and significance, that sense that they matter. Yeah. And when these laws are being passed, and when people are just maybe just not saying anything at all, you can just feel so ignored, invisible, insignificant, exactly the opposite of what you feel. So the statistics you're citing to me they don't surprise me in the least. Yeah. And they're very troubling. But, in terms of people who need to recognize the student, who need to give the student a sense of belonging and significance, parents come to mind. So as a teacher, when you're talking with parents, how do you balance that line between the student who has, they're either questioning their identity, or they're very clear about their identity, but the parents aren't ready to hear it? And how do you walk that? How do you walk through that?
I honestly, I take the student's lead, because one big thing is, I don't really like the term out, but you don't want to out a student when they're not ready. So I really do take the student's lead. Everything within my classroom is confidential. So like, if they're using different pronouns with me, I have the form, and this is from Teaching Outside the Binary. ACE has this lovely form that they use in middle school, and it's accessible for elementary and high school as well. But on that, they put what pronouns they would like to be used, names they'd like to be called. They put who they're comfortable with knowing that those pronouns in that name. So that's really important, that no matter what, we always take the student's lead when it comes to how much they would like their caregiver to know, because they are their own human and they might be exploring something that maybe they end up actually not going with. Like we forget how, well, I shouldn't say we forget, we don't always know that gender is exploratory. And so a student may use, they, them pronouns one year, and then the next year they're like, I'm good. I'm actually want to stick with like, she, her, or he, him. So allowing that exploration in our classrooms is really important, and allowing the choice of who they want to know is also very important. So if a student wants to, come out to their parents and they want my support, I haven't had that experience yet, but there are ways to do that. But I can't speak from experience yet because I haven't had
Sure.
one.
I'm so glad that you said, if they want to use they, them pronouns one year and then the next year they want to go back to using he, him, or she, her, go with it. Because I get that question all the time from teachers. What do I do with these kids that change their mind all the time? Well, they're in flux. They are questioning. They are not certain. They're figuring it out. They're experimenting. And it's very normative, really. It's typical for kids to question, for them to feel this fluidity.
Yeah.
So the best thing an educator can do, parent can do, is go with it. And like, as you said, the very first thing you said is, I take my lead from the kids. Yeah. So that was great. Another way in which, sometimes parents they're demanding these drastic changes in curriculum. How can, and I think this is probably right in your wheelhouse, this question, what are effective ways to educate and counteract misinformation?
Yeah, so I was thinking a lot about that question. Honestly, it's hard when people aren't ready to want to learn, right? They take the information as fact. So you have to find a middle ground. And honestly, it's very difficult right now with some, not all, but with some, they're very adamant that and believe that gender and sexual identity equals that we're sex, which is not happening at all and would never happen in a K-5 classroom. So because of that viewpoint, though, it does make the conversation very difficult, that it becomes this kind of circular, or even a straw man argument, of just like constantly going back to sex, or referring to as pedophilia and things like that. So all these words dropped. But like, if they are open and ready to have that conversation, it's really important for me to stick with the facts and the standards that I'm teaching, and sticking with like, this is where child development they are at, and this is where they are going to progress to. So I really focus on what my degree's in, and come about it that way if they're ready to have the conversation. And I say if, because unfortunately, a lot of people I've encountered lately are just not, they're just there for not having a conversation.
Sure.
Which is really upsetting, but we're humans and we have to kind of figure out how to work together in this weird world that we're in. So.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But, one of the things that really drew us to wanting to talk to you was, looking through your profile, we saw how open you are about all aspects of your identity, and how well you rebut people who suggest you should just basically stop talking about trans and queer topics.
Yeah.
So how have you developed this confidence to be as open, clear, and forthright as you are?
Honestly, it got to when I finally did realize, like, oh, these are the words that describe me and always have. It was a point for me of like, I can't not live my truth anymore. If I were to, I can't hold back anything, because I've held back so much of myself for so long because of the cishet society I've grown up in, because it, like, society itself, like, I had to be this, I had to be this, I had to be this. I was raised female, and So I was conditioned female, and I was, told like this is what I need to present as and be in order to be loved, accepted, and have a fulfilling life. And to find the words to describe myself and to find who I am and find that truth for myself. That's really where the confidence comes from, is because I realized like who I am holistically in that moment and was able to grow and still am growing and walking in. I know that me being visible and showing that is going to help someone else find that as well. And so that's really where that comes from. And, I mess it up, and that's great too. And I'm okay with that, because it's messy and it's meant to be messy. And I think people think it's supposed to be this like perfect, you're born this way and that's what you are. And it's like, no, that's not how life necessarily works. And that's okay. And humanity is very complex and beautiful and gross at the same time, and it's okay. We've got to kind of work through that and find ourselves within all of that mess. So
We are all of those things.
yeah.
So, I was just thinking, you were saying earlier how comforting it can be for a kid to walk into a classroom and see a pride flag. How comforting it must be for a kid to walk into a classroom and meet you. Wow, I'm really going to be okay here. Here's somebody who is not afraid to be themselves and who is just going to be, forthright with me, and I'm going to be able to talk about what I need to talk about in here. This is great.
Yeah.
So another place where kids experiment, I think, a lot is on social media, and it can be a great outlet for kids, and sometimes it's a place where kids maybe, come out for the first time. Mm-hmm. But it's also a place where kids experience cyberbullying. So what advice would you give kids when navigating the world of social media?
I would say like that, find your people, because like it's really easy to cut down the rabbit hole of social media. However, there are beautiful, lovely support groups out there, and I myself have some amazing support groups on Instagram, on TikTok, on Discord, where it's just queer people living their truth and willing to let other people in and be friends with them. So it's really like the hate, yes, like we will always see that discourse happening on social media. But there's also spaces where you can really learn and find who you are. I know on Reddit, actually, like there's like some wonderful small trans community that I'm a part of, and I don't always engage there, but I love just reading and seeing these lovely trans people like being themselves and finding themselves. And then out here in Los Angeles, we have the Trans Lounge, and we have a Discord where a bunch of trans people from actually across the United States are a part of it. And that started because of the pandemic. So really, find your people, fill your feed with joyful representation. Find the people who help you really find yourself, so find, whatever you're thinking, like, oh, I might identify in that way, like find people like that and follow them. And whether you do or not, it's just wonderful to have them in your feed and grow and learn with them and see them.
That's great advice. Kurt Vonnegut called it your Granfalloon, the people who you really felt like, were your real family, the people out in the world who you meet, right? So the people who you can really connect with and who you feel safe with. So terrific advice. So we're nearing the end of our time, but I wonder if you can share an anecdote or experience that personally impacted you and caused you to be so passionate about gender inclusive practices. I mean, obviously one thing is your identity, but, is there anything in particular that stands out to you as an experience that really kind of seized you?
I mean, it's always been, I think, well, it's transcended the classroom, but honestly, with teaching, seeing, like, it's kind of cheesy, but like seeing the impact you make as a teacher, good and bad, honestly, because we make mistakes, teachers, all the time, and it's important we acknowledge those mistakes. But when I became more out and open with the students, and just seeing them start to really thrive and learn under as I was learning about myself with them, was really impactful to the point. And then of course my dog now found the squeaky toy. Um, and then but I actually have a note here from one of my students, and they just wrote down on here that they were so happy to have me as their teacher. I teach fifth grade, as their teacher for their last year at our elementary school, and how they described me as amazing and graceful, and that even when someone judges me, that they see me becoming stronger. And to know like that, like a student like who's 10 wrote that to me and was seeing that, like that always just like me being living my truth is impacting them as human beings. Like it doesn't matter what I'm teaching them, like just them seeing that representation is impacting them to be better human beings. And that just has that always sticks with me. And I have other notes similar to that. But yeah,
And I assume you keep them all, right?
I do.
Yeah.
I'm one of the, I have a binder like from my
I do too.
and I have a binder, and I feel like if any of my students are watching, I keep all your notes. I keep all your like it's all right there.
No, absolutely. You got to keep that. You have to keep that. But really, it's fuel, isn't it? So it's not one thing. It's these repeated experiences that nurture you and make you realize how important it is that, you know, what kids are watching us all the time, and they're watching what we do, and they're watching what we say, and they're watching who we are. And that's what leave, you know, 20 years from now, that 10-year-old is going to be remembering that, and hopefully paying that forward, bringing that out there. So
Yeah, exactly.
So you mentioned a number of resources, including the Trevor Project, which is a great resource. Is there anything else that any other place you'd suggest for people to go? You know, whether trans people or, you know, people who want to learn more or want to help.
Yeah, I would recommend, well, Learning for Justice is always a fantastic resource for teachers, especially. They have articles as well as just resources for and lessons to use in the classroom around multiple topics, not just queer topics. And then there's GLSEN has resources for teachers to use within the classroom. And then Gender Inclusive Classrooms, they're an amazing duo, and they have a lot of fantastic curriculum resources for younger kids, all the way to kindergarten, and lesson plans that you can actually purchase from them that have different themes and things like that. So they're pretty amazing. And they have a whole article about how to start a rainbow club at your school, which
nice, because that's a big one. Nice.
Yes. Yeah. So, and right, for those of you that don't know, a Rainbow Club is the elementary version of a GSA. And you can make it specifically for students, or you can make it more inclusive to the community and open it up to families. So it's really up to you how you want to do it, but they have a whole article and a PDF on like how to get started on that. And those are the ones I can think of top of my head. I also like have resources and links, and my friend Ace and I, we have a Patreon where we post lessons and slides every month and put out newsletters with resources. So that's also like, we'll throw that out there for people if you need it. We're specifically focused on education and for elementary and middle school. So, yeah.
All right, thanks so much. So everyone who's watching, this is Sky Tooley. You can follow them at Growing with MXT, right?
Yeah, Growing with Mixed T. Yep.
Growing with Mixed T, sorry.
Oh no, you're good.
And you know, and what's your Patreon again? Outside the binary?
It's Growing Outside the Binary.
Growing Outside the Binary.
Yeah.
So those are two places where you can go right away, and you're gonna just find all sorts of ideas and resources. And if you're out there tonight, you're watching us, you're an educator, you're a mental health professional, you're passionate about kids and mental health, reach out to us. We'd love to talk to you too. Sky, thank you so much. Have a wonderful
Thank you.
evening with Terrence, and take good care. Thanks again
too.
so much.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye. Good night, everybody.